There are moments in life when we feel like giving up, when the burden seems too heavy and the road too long. Yet what we often don't see is that right at the point of greatest exhaustion, God is often closest to opening the door of the blessing we've been waiting for. That struggle you're facing, that waiting that feels endless, may actually be the very sign that you are standing at the threshold of a miracle. You are not here by accident. You are here because God wants to remind you that your story doesn't end in defeat, but in the victory He has already prepared for you. Stay with me, because what I'll share today may be the spark that renews your strength and keeps you from giving up just before receiving what you've been praying for. Before we continue, I want to ask you for something very important. If this message speaks to your heart, support this work by liking, commenting, and sharing this video. You might think it's a small action, but in reality, it is a great blessing. Every time you do this, YouTube recommends the message to more people who, just like you, need a space to connect with God. With this simple act, you can help many others find hope and encouragement. To participate, I invite you to write this short phrase in the comments: God gives me strength. It will be a way to declare your faith publicly and also to join others who are walking through similar challenges. Part 1. Understand that weariness is part of the process. When we talk about not giving up right before the blessing, the first thing we need to understand is that weariness, discouragement, and doubt are not signs of failure, but indicators that we are moving forward. No one who is standing still gets tired. Tiredness only appears when you are walking, when you are working, when you are fighting for something that truly matters. That's why when you feel drained, when your mind tells you that you can't go on, it's actually proof that you have been pushing forward with all your strength, and that weariness is the evidence that you're still in motion. The Bible reminds us in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31, "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Notice, it doesn't say that you will never feel tired, but rather that in the midst of your tiredness, God promises to renew you. This means that exhaustion is not the end of the journey. It's the place where God steps in to give you what you cannot produce on your own. Think of a long-distance runner. When he reaches the middle of the race, his body starts sending signals that he can't go any further. Muscles ache, breathing becomes heavy, and the mind whispers that quitting would be easier. But trainers know something very important. That point of exhaustion is actually the boundary between weakness and endurance. If the runner pushes through that boundary and keeps going, his body adapts, his strength rises, and he discovers power he didn't even know he had. That's exactly what happens in our spiritual lives. When you feel like giving up, it's because you've reached the boundary. If you decide to push forward, to trust God one more time, you'll discover a strength that doesn't come from you but from Him. Jesus Himself gave us the perfect example of this in the Garden of Gethsemane. Before going to the cross, He prayed in such deep anguish that His sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. He was exhausted, in a moment of human weakness so intense that He said, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." But then He added the phrase that changed everything, "Yet not my will, but yours be done." Jesus showed us that weariness is not a sign to quit, but an opportunity to surrender to the perfect plan of God and receive the strength to continue. And this is where I want to pause with you. Maybe right now you feel tired, not only physically, but deep inside. You've prayed for months, maybe even years, and nothing seems to change. You've worked, but you don't see the results you expected. You've endured trials, but you still don't see the breakthrough. And your mind says, "What's the point? Why keep trying?" But listen carefully. The tiredness you feel is not proof that God has forgotten you. It's proof that you are close. Because the harder the battle, the greater the victory that is about to be revealed. Remember what the Apostle Paul said in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. "Let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart." Once again, the key is not to avoid weariness, but to refuse to give up. God never asked you to never feel tired. He asked you to not faint in the midst of it. Because the harvest is already scheduled, the blessing is already on its way, and you only need to take one more step. Think about it this way. If you feel like you can't go any further, it doesn't mean you're going to fall. It means you're standing at the threshold of what God has prepared. Think of a woman about to give birth. Right before seeing her child, she goes through the most intense pain, the strongest contractions, the hardest effort. But right after that moment comes life, joy, and the fulfillment of the promise. That's how the blessing of God works. The deepest pain often comes right before the greatest miracle. So don't confuse your exhaustion with the end of God's plan. Don't assume that if you're tired, you've lost. On the contrary, understand that your weariness is the evidence that you are fighting the good fight of faith. And if today, in the middle of your weakness, you lift your eyes to heaven and say, "Lord, renew my strength," He will do it. Because He promised that those who wait on Him shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Part 2. Recognize that the fiercest battle comes right before the victory. One of the hardest yet most transformative truths to embrace is that the darkest moment of the night often means the dawn is about to break. Spiritually, it works the same way. When the struggles intensify, when trials multiply, when the pressure feels unbearable, it's often a sign that you are closer than ever to the blessing God has promised. Think about it. The enemy does not waste energy attacking those who are standing still. If you were on a path with no purpose, if you weren't advancing toward what God has for you, the enemy wouldn't bother placing obstacles in your way. But when he sees you getting closer to your promised land, when he notices your prayers are opening the heavens, when your faith is about to bear fruit, he increases the intensity of his attacks. That's why the battle feels strongest just before the breakthrough. The Bible gives us countless examples of this. Consider the people of Israel at the Red Sea. They had left Egypt with the promise of freedom, but before experiencing it fully, they faced the most critical moment, an impassable sea before them, and Pharaoh's army behind them. To human eyes, it looked like the end, like certain defeat. Yet in reality, it was the prelude to the greatest miracle they would ever see. God split the sea and let them walk through on dry ground, proving that the fiercest battle was not a sign of abandonment, but the setup for victory. The same is true for your life. When you feel surrounded by problems with no way out and the enemy looks bigger than you, that sensation of being trapped might be the very place where God reveals His power in ways you've never imagined. The fiercest battle is not the signal that you're finished. It's the signal that you are just one step away from victory. The Apostle Peter said it in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10, "And the God of all grace, who called you to His eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will Himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast." Notice the order. First comes suffering, then restoration. First the battle, then the victory. First weakness, then strength. That is how God works. He uses the struggle to prepare us to enjoy what He is about to give us. It's like a farmer waiting for the harvest. The final days before gathering the fruit are often the most demanding because the field requires special care and effort. But that season of intensity doesn't last forever. It's just a short time before the joy of reaping comes. In the same way, your hardest struggles are not permanent. They are proof that the fruit you've been sowing with tears is about to be harvested with joy. Don't forget the story of Joshua right before entering the Promised Land. God told him in Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." That command came right before conquering the promise they had waited years to receive. God knew the final battle could stir fear, so He reminded Joshua that He would be with him in every step. Now think about your own life. Why do things suddenly feel harder? Why do problems seem to grow right now? Could it be that it's not a coincidence, but a confirmation that you're closer than ever? The enemy doesn't want you to cross the finish line. He wants to wear you down at the very last stretch. But this is where you must decide to stand firm, lift your eyes, and declare, "I will not give up, because my victory is near." The fiercest battle doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to confirm that God is with you. As Romans chapter 8 verse 37 says, "In all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us." Notice it doesn't say after the battle we will be conquerors. It says in the middle of all these things we already are more than conquerors. Your identity in Christ is not based on the size of the battle, but on the victory that was already secured at the cross. So when the struggle intensifies, don't see it as a curse, see it as a sign. It's the alarm announcing that you are stepping into a new season. It's the confirmation that your prayers are not in vain. It's the evidence that your blessing is closer than you think. And when you hold on to that perspective, you'll be able to face the fiercest battle with the unshakable confidence that your victory has already been written in heaven. Part 3. Faith is the key that unlocks your blessing. When we speak about not giving up right before the blessing, there's one word that changes everything: faith. Faith is that invisible force that sustains you when everything around you seems to collapse. It's the conviction that allows you to keep walking when your eyes see nothing, when your hands feel nothing, and when your heart senses only silence. Faith is what transforms painful waiting into a purposeful journey. The Bible defines faith in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 like this: "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." That definition reminds us that faith is not about seeing immediate results, but about trusting in the promise, even when circumstances look the opposite. And here's the hardest truth: your faith will be tested, not because God can't fulfill His word, He always can, but because He wants to know if you will believe even when there's no visible sign of change. Look at Abraham's story. God promised him he would be the father of many nations, yet years passed with no fulfillment. His age increased, Sarah's age increased, and human possibilities were gone. But Romans chapter 4 verse 20 tells us that Abraham did not waver in unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God, fully convinced that God was able to do what He had promised. That is the essence of faith, believing God even when everything else tells you otherwise. Faith is like a key. You may stand before a huge locked door. You can push it, kick it, get frustrated because it won't open. But if you have the right key, it opens with ease. Faith is that key. No matter how big the door, no matter how strong the lock, faith in God opens what looked impossible. This is why one of the greatest attacks a believer faces before receiving their blessing is against their faith. The enemy whispers thoughts of doubt. What if God doesn't hear you? What if that promise wasn't for you? What if this has all been pointless? Maybe you've even felt like your prayers hit the ceiling, like your tears went unseen, like your steps of obedience made no difference. But remember what Jesus said in Mark chapter 9 verse 23, "Everything is possible for the one who believes, not for the one who doubts, not for the one who quits, but for the one who believes." And listen, your faith doesn't need to be massive to move heaven. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 17 verse 20, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Do you see what that means? It's not about the size of your faith, but about the greatness of the God you trust in. A little faith placed in a great God moves mountains. Faith doesn't eliminate the battle, but it changes the way you face it. When you choose to believe, hope fills your heart. When you choose to trust, peace fills your mind. When you choose to hold on to the promise even without results, you start walking as if you already received what you prayed for. That attitude opens the way for the miracle to manifest. Faith is also a daily decision. It's not just a one-time moment when you say, "I believe." It's waking up each day and declaring, "Today I still trust. Today I still hope. Today I still believe." And the more you do it, the stronger you become. That's why the enemy wants to steal your faith, because Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 says that without faith, it is impossible to please God. Let me give you an image. Faith is like a lamp in a dark tunnel. Without it, every step feels terrifying, uncertain, and hopeless. But with the lamp, even though you can't see the end of the tunnel, you have enough light for the next step. And step by step, you eventually reach the exit. Faith doesn't always reveal the whole path, but it always gives you enough light to keep moving. So if today you feel your faith is weak, don't condemn yourself. Instead, do what the man in the Gospel of Mark cried out to Jesus: "I believe, help my unbelief." That honest prayer has power because God doesn't reject a humble heart that acknowledges its need. He doesn't expect perfect faith, only that you cling to him even in the middle of doubt. That's why, dear listener, keep your faith alive. Even if the winds blow against you, even if the night seems endless, even if the silence feels heavy, remember that your faith is the key that will open the door. And when you least expect it, that door will swing wide open and you will step into the blessing you've been waiting for. Part 4. Persevere in obedience even when you don't see immediate results. One of the biggest temptations when you are close to your blessing is to abandon obedience. It is easy to follow God when everything goes well, when doors open quickly, and when prayers are answered fast. But the real test of faith is to keep walking in obedience when nothing seems to change, when your efforts look invisible, and when you wonder if your sacrifice is even worth it. The journey of the people of Israel shows us this truth clearly. God had promised them the land of Canaan, but between the promise and the fulfillment, there was a desert. And in that desert, God was not only guiding their steps, he was testing their obedience. When they chose to complain and disobey, their progress was delayed. Not because God had forgotten his promise, but because they failed to remain faithful in the process. This teaches us something powerful. Many times we don't see the blessing, not because God doesn't want to give it, but because we stop obeying before the time of fulfillment arrives. Jesus himself reminded his disciples in John chapter 14, verse 15, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Notice he didn't say, "If everything goes well, obey me." He said, "If you love me." Real obedience is not a reaction to circumstances, it is a reflection of love. And love doesn't change when things get hard. Think about Noah. God told him to build a massive ark in a time when rain like that had never been seen before. To others, it looked like foolishness, but Noah kept obeying, hammer by hammer, plank by plank, until the day the flood came. His obedience, though it seemed unreasonable, saved his family and preserved humanity. Or Abraham, when God asked him to offer Isaac. It made no sense. This was the son of promise, the very one through whom God said he would make him a great nation. Yet Abraham obeyed, step by step, even when the command was painful. And in that act of obedience, God revealed his provision and reaffirmed his promise. Now let's bring this closer to your life. How many times have you been tempted to stop praying because you don't see answers? How many times have you thought about stopping your giving, your service, or your kindness because the results are not immediate? That's exactly what the enemy wants, to get you to stop just before your harvest. But remember what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." Nothing you do in obedience to God is wasted. Obedience is like planting a seed. When you put it in the soil, you see nothing at first. Days, weeks, even months may pass, and the ground looks the same. But under the surface, something powerful is happening. The seed is dying to itself, breaking open and preparing to grow. One day, without warning, it breaks through the ground. That's how obedience works. Even if you don't see results today, your acts of obedience are preparing a harvest for tomorrow. Jesus spoke about the faithful servant who keeps working while his master is away. When the master returns and finds him faithful, he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things." That shows us something vital. Faithfulness in what seems small or unnoticed is what positions you for greater things. Dear listener, don't let discouragement push you away from obedience. Keep doing what is right, even when no one sees, even when no one thanks you, even when it feels unnoticed. God sees every prayer, every act of generosity, every step of obedience. And at the right time, that faithfulness will open the door to your blessing. So persevere in obedience, because obedience is the bridge between your present struggle and your future victory. Part 5. Remember that God always fulfills his promises in his perfect timing. One of the most common mistakes we make when we are close to our blessing is to grow anxious because it hasn't arrived when we expected. We become impatient when days, months, or even years pass without visible change. But here's a truth you must hold tightly. God always fulfills his promises, but he does so in his perfect time, not ours. The Bible is full of examples of this reality. Look at Abraham. God promised him descendants, but decades passed before Isaac was born. From a human perspective, it looked like God had forgotten. Yet the promise was never on pause. It was unfolding in God's timing. The waiting was not wasted. It was shaping Abraham's character, building his faith, and preparing him to receive. And when the appointed time came, the promise was fulfilled exactly as God had said. Consider Joseph. God gave him dreams of leadership, but before those dreams came true, he faced betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and years in prison. To anyone watching, it looked like the dream had died. But every painful step was part of God's plan to position him. At the right time, Joseph was lifted to power and could declare to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." His story shows us that God's promises are not cancelled by delays or detours. They are strengthened through them. Your life works the same way. The fact that you haven't seen your blessing yet does not mean God forgot about you. It means He is preparing the ground, aligning the circumstances, and shaping your heart so that when the promise arrives, you will be ready to carry it. Receiving is not the only goal. Being able to sustain the blessing is equally important. Psalm chapter 37 verse 5 says, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He shall bring it to pass." Notice the progression. Your part is to commit and trust. His part is to make it happen. And when God acts, He always does it at the perfect moment. Not too early, not too late. Think of fruit on a tree. If you pick it too soon, it's sour and unripe. But if you wait for the right time, it's sweet and nourishing. That's how the promises of God work. If you try to force them in your own strength, they won't be complete. But if you wait on the Lord, the blessing will be mature and perfect. Waiting is not passive, it is active. It is praying even when the heavens feel silent. It is obeying even when you don't see change. It is trusting even when your heart is restless. Waiting is the school where God matures your faith and builds your endurance. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 3 reminds us, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it lingers, wait for it. It will certainly come. It will not delay." This is a promise you can hold on to. If God said it, it will come. The promise might seem slow, but it's on its way. It will not fail. So, dear listener, when the waiting feels heavy and endless, remember this. God's calendar never makes mistakes. You are not behind schedule. You are exactly where He wants you to be, and when the perfect time arrives, the promise will be fulfilled. Because God is not a man that He should lie, nor a son of man that He should change His mind. What He has spoken, He will do. What He has declared, He will accomplish.